Chapter 2: The Pursuit of Happiness and Fulfillment. The perennial pursuit of humankind. Happiness, by universal acclaim, has been the perennial pursuit of humankind. In recent times, the pursuit of happiness has become a favorite pastime of psychologists, psychotherapists, neuroscientists, sociologists, policymakers, economists, and self-help gurus. There is no dearth of happiness recipes, from Buddha to Tony Robbins, as Martin Seligman, the co-founder of positive psychology, pleasantly puts it. An impartial survey of the human condition and a little reflection confirm that pursuing happiness in worldly goods like wealth, power, and success has no end to it, and ultimately leads only to frustration and weariness of spirit. After all, no lasting happiness can be found pursuing things that are inherently unstable, transient, and uncertain. Moreover, no matter how much we have of these goods, there is always more that we long to have. Speaking of the insatiability of human appetites and our constant discontent, Machiavelli, though not a dependable guide in this terrain, rightly points out, we are so constituted that our appetite for things will always exceed our ability to get them. The business of life, said Schopenhauer, does not cover its expenses. 26 centuries ago, Greeks recognized happiness to be the ultimate good and defined it as the exercise of human faculties along the lines of excellence. The chief purpose of education, said Plato, is to teach young people to find pleasure in the right things. Aristotle, Plato's star disciple, believed that, above all, men and women seek happiness. For him, happiness was the ultimate, the highest, the supreme good, since it is sought for its own sake. We desire everything else, wealth, fame, success, in order to be happy. For the Greeks, happiness was the supreme good, firmly rooted in virtue. More than a century before Aristotle, Confucius, a Chinese sage, also spoke of the good life in terms of a virtuous life, comprised of learning extensively, having a firm and sincere aim, inquiring with earnestness, and reflecting with self-application. Confucius's whole teaching centers around the concept of goodness, which denotes a feeling of compassion, a caring concern for the well-being of others. According to Confucius, the superior person is firm in a good way, not merely firm. In his characteristic way, Confucius ruminates, "At 15, I had my mind bent on learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no doubts. At 50, I knew the decrees of heaven. At 60, my ear was an obedient organ for the reception of truth. At 70, I could follow what my heart desired, without transgressing what was right." Aristotle's recipe for happiness. Aristotle defines a happy life in terms of a good life. To say that somebody is happy is the very same thing as saying that one is living a life worth living. Aristotle uses the Greek concept of eudaimonia to fully express his views on what he considers to be a life well lived. His definition of eudaimonia can be roughly stated as the exercise of human faculties along the lines of excellence, in a life affording them full expression. According to Aristotle, good life is identical with eudaimonia, which is defined as living and faring well and is denoted by the activity of the soul exhibiting the highest and most complete excellence in a complete life. The key terms are action, excellence, and reason. Excellence, according to Aristotle, is not an innate gift. It is achieved through repeated practice until it becomes a habit, a settled disposition. For we are what we repeatedly do. In a posthumously published manuscript titled Heroes of History, Durant captures the essence of Aristotle's view of happiness succinctly. The goal of conduct is happiness, but the secret of happiness is virtue, and the best virtue is intelligence, a careful consideration of the reality, the goals, and the means. Usually, virtue is a golden mean between the extremes. It must be noted that happiness is not mere pleasure. Although a happy person feels pleasure, experience and observation dictate that sensuous gratification is not an abiding route to happiness. Human apparatus is doomed, so to speak, ab initio, by the operation of what is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. That is, as we consume more and more units of a specific commodity, the utility of the successive units diminishes. This applies equally to all our experiences directed at consuming pleasures. Durant clarifies, surely, sense pleasure is not the way. That road is a circle. As Socrates phrased the coarser Epicurean idea, we scratch that we may itch, and itch that we may scratch. No, happiness must be a pleasure of mind, and we may trust it only when it comes from the pursuit or the capture of truth. Therefore, for Aristotle, happiness is the virtuous activity of the soul in accordance with reason. Aristotle further clarifies that to be happy, we should seek what is good for us in the long run, for we cannot become happy by living for the pleasures of the moment. Aristotle includes, among the main constituents of happiness, such things as health and wealth, knowledge and friendship, good fortune, and a good moral character. For him, a life lived in accordance with excellence in moral and intellectual virtue constitutes the essence of a happy life. He is happy who lives in accordance with complete virtue and is sufficiently equipped with external goods, not for some chance period, but throughout a complete life. A good life is one that has been lived by making morally virtuous choices or decisions. As Epictetus puts it, happy is the man who in the course of a lifetime has satisfied all his desires, provided he desires nothing amiss. Positive psychology and the pursuit of happiness. During the last decade, positive psychology has heralded a new research field called happiness research. Although the pursuit of happiness is as old as human civilization, only recently has scientific evidence emerged to suggest a possible path to lasting happiness that is effective for majority of people. In response to a self-posed question, is happiness a worthwhile goal? James Kurtz and Sonja Lyubomirsky cite previous research that suggests that across all the domains of life, happy people are energetic, creative, and productive in the workplace, cooperative and motivated to help others. They have more friends, more satisfying social interactions, and stronger immune systems. They cope more effectively with stress, and most strikingly, even live longer. Positive psychology, a recently conceived branch of psychology, aims to understand and promote lasting well-being, or authentic happiness. Positive psychology is built on 3 pillars: positive emotion, positive strengths, and positive institutions. It has its roots in the works of humanistic psychologists such as Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, and Erich Fromm, who focused on personal fulfillment and well-being. In fact, Maslow was the first psychologist to use this term in his 1954 classic, Motivation and Personality. The contribution of positive psychology is that it has provided scientific evidence consistent with what philosophers and humanistic psychologists intuitively believed. Positive psychology focuses on character, flourishing, and fulfillment. It aims to explore how to live a happy and fulfilling life, how to define and develop human strengths, and how to build character and resilience. Seligman, one of the founders of positive psychology, believes that authentic happiness has three interrelated constituents: pleasure, strengths, and meaning. The pleasant life, in which we successfully pursue positive emotions about the present, past, and future. The good life, in which we use our signature strengths to obtain abundant gratification in the main realms of our life. The meaningful life, in which we use our signature strengths and virtues in the service of something much larger than we are. And the larger that something is, the more meaning our lives have. To live all three lives, concludes Seligman, is to lead a full life. The sustainable happiness model. Can people be lastingly happy? Until recently, psychologists used to explain our limits to achieving lasting happiness by invoking the genetic setpoint theory and the concept of hedonic adaptation. First, happiness is partially determined by genetics, and second, people tend to adapt or become accustomed to most positive life experiences. The genetic setpoint theory is based on decades of research done with identical twins and fraternal twins that suggests that each of us is born with a particular happiness set point that originates in our biological mother or father or both, a baseline or potential for happiness to which we are bound to return, even after major setbacks or triumphs. The theory of hedonic adaptation or hedonic treadmill is used to explain the tendency for the emotional impact of both positive and negative events to diminish over time. In an article published in Scientific American, Marina Kravosky explains, the classic example of such hedonic adaptation comes from a 1970 study of lottery winners, who a year after their windfall ended up no happier than non-winners. Hedonic adaptations helps to explain why even changes in major life circumstances, such as income, marriage, physical health, and where we live, do so little to boost our overall happiness. Not only that, but studies of twins and adoptees have shown that about 50% of each person's happiness is determined from birth. This genetic set point alone makes the happiness glass look half empty, because any upward swing in happiness seems doomed to fall back to near your baseline. Obviously, trying to raise our set point by altering genes is currently impossible, although some have challenged the pervasiveness of the set point theory, and life circumstances such as gender, ethnicity, marital status, education level, health, income, physical appearance, and settings only account for a mere 10% of our happiness. Clearly, the key to lasting happiness lies elsewhere. Empirical research by Lyubomirsky and her colleagues has shown that we can increase our happiness as much as 40% by intentionally engaging in activities such as expressing gratitude, doing random acts of kindness, and creating a sense of optimism. Distinguishing between life circumstances and intentional activities, Lyubomirsky et al. Further explain that circumstances happen to people and activities are ways people act on their circumstances. After all, if we cannot change the course of the winds, that is the genetic set point, we can always adjust our sails, that is, circumstances and intentional activity. These researchers clarify that these mindful actions, intentional activities, can make people happy only if they keep doing them. Intentional activity is therefore a matter of self-effort, and in order to derive full benefit out of intentional activities, the authors suggest that we need to invest efforts first in initiating the intentional activities and then in maintaining them. These authors further maintain that the intentional activities, to be sustainable and meaningful, should be well-timed, varied, and fitted to the person doing them. These activities require commitment and persistence. Mihaly, who co-founded positive psychology with Seligman, believes that happiness is not an arbitrary gift, but a hard-won reward of well-cultivated inner control. Happiness, in fact, is a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated, and defended privately by each person. People who learn to control inner experience will be able to determine the quality of their inner lives, which is as close as any of us can come to being happy. However, some fear that the recent enthusiasm about the science of happiness may have gotten ahead of the art of happiness. Writers like Frankl have cautioned that the very pursuit of happiness, paradoxically, may render it eminently unattainable. This chapter's opening story about the kitten chasing its tail splendidly demonstrates this point. According to this view, happiness is not a house that one can build with one's hands. It is the byproduct of one's selfless dedication to a cause larger than oneself. If you want to live a happy life, said Albert Einstein, tie it to a goal, not to people or things. There is no direct road to fulfillment. The road to happiness, at best, is circuitous and indirect. In the preface to the 1984 edition of his now classic work, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl states that it seemed to be both strange and remarkable that the book he had intended to publish anonymously did in fact become a success. He repeatedly admonished his students about the circuitous path to happiness and success. Do not aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. I want you to listen to what your conscience commands you to do, and go on to carry it out to the best of your knowledge. Then you will live to see that in the long run I say, success will follow you precisely because you had forgotten to think of it. Frankl's work serves as a clarion call to rise above life's circumstances and bear suffering with courage and dignity. The life examples of Mother Teresa, Mahatma Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela are testimonies to this discovery of meaning, to rise above life's conditions and make life worthwhile against all odds through dedication to a selfless cause. Russell, a modern philosopher and an early explorer of this field, in his down-to-earth compendium of happiness, called The Conquest of Happiness, notes, I do not deny that the feeling of success makes it easier to enjoy life, nor do I deny that money, up to a certain point, is very capable of increasing happiness. What I do maintain is that success can only be one ingredient in happiness and is too dearly purchased if all the other ingredients have been sacrificed to obtain it. In an Aristotelian vein, Russell adds that the happiness that is genuinely satisfying is accompanied by the finest exercise of our faculties and the fullest realization of the world in which we live. According to Russell, the secret of happiness is this: let your interests be as wide as possible, and let your reactions to the things and persons that interest you be as far as possible friendly rather than hostile. In his recent book, titled Stumbling on Happiness, Dan Gilbert opines that we are grossly inaccurate at predicting what will make us happy and how happiness happens. Gilbert's main thesis is that, through a sort of psychological illusion, we imagine the future inaccurately, particularly in regard to what will make us happy. The solution Gilbert presents to accurately estimate our happiness is to learn from people with similar backgrounds and experiences. The variance in subjectivity of happiness, says Gilbert, is a lot lower than the distortion caused by our own imagination. In recapitulating the discussion so far, one is struck by the similarities between recent happiness research and Buddhist psychology. Using two different modes of exploration, empirical research and insight meditation respectively, positive psychology and Buddhist traditions have arrived at essentially the same conclusion. The road to lasting happiness is paved by a selfless, caring concern for others. It is cultivated by harnessing our intrinsic goodness, by developing the spiritual qualities of mind and heart, qualities of kindness and compassion, gratitude and altruism. The next section explores, at length, the Buddhist approach to personal fulfillment and well-being. Buddhist psychology and the pursuit of fulfillment. It is paradoxical that a religion that starts with the basic truth of existential suffering has contributed the most to our understanding of the elusive pursuit of happiness. Adherents of Buddhism, or Buddha Dharma, as Buddhists prefer to call it, like to point out that Buddhism is not a religion in the traditional sense, with a creator God who punishes and rewards, but rather a do-it-yourself art and science of mind that is built upon the very experiences of our life here and now. There are no articles of faith in Buddhism and no commandments to follow beyond the appreciation of things as they truly are, the law of cause and effect, and the understanding that we are the creatures of our thoughts, the products of our mind. The first noble truth, taught by the Buddha, states that life involves suffering. This has led some to conclude that Buddhism must be a life-denying and pessimistic approach to life. But Buddha taught 4 noble truths about life, not just one. After analyzing the causes of suffering in the second noble truth, Buddha goes on to state that it is possible to end this suffering, third noble truth, and prescribes a path called the Noble Eightfold Path to the cessation of suffering, which is the fourth noble truth. Valpola Rahula clarifies, the Buddha does not deny happiness in life when he says there is suffering. In his discourses, there is a list of happinesses, such as the happiness of family life and the happiness of the life of the recluse, the happiness of sense pleasures, and the happiness of renunciation, the happiness of attachment and the happiness of detachment, physical happiness and mental happiness. The Buddha was realistic and objective. He says, with regard to life and enjoyment of sense pleasures, that one should clearly understand three things: attraction or enjoyment, evil consequence or danger or unsatisfactoriness, and freedom or liberation. These three things are true with regard to all enjoyment in life. It has been noted that Buddhism does not deny that there are satisfactions in worldly life. The Buddhist insight into the real nature of reality helps us see the true nature of such forms of happiness clearly. Pain is to be seen as pain, pleasure as pleasure. What is denied is that such happiness will be secure and lasting, Rahula concludes. This does not at all make the life of a Buddhist melancholy or sorrowful, as some people wrongly imagine. On the contrary, a true Buddhist is the happiest of beings. He has no fears or anxieties. He is always calm and serene and cannot be upset or dismayed by the changes or calamities because he sees things as they are. Key lessons of Buddhist psychology. It is said that right after the Buddha became enlightened, he uttered the following, in the language of those days: Dukkham dukkham, meaning suffering, suffering. Kshanikam kshanikam, meaning momentary, momentary. Avalakshanam avalakshanam, meaning non-self, non-self. And Shunyam shunyam, meaning void, void. Building on this, the key message of Buddhist psychology and its view of reality, the way things really are, can be captured in the following 5 simple axioms. First, our mind is the source of bondage as well as freedom. Second, all self-centered emotions lead to suffering. Third, relative is impermanent. Fourth, everything is dependent upon and related to everything else. Fifth, practicing altruistic kindness is the most essential ingredient of genuine happiness and better mental health. The source of bondage and freedom. According to Buddhism, both happiness and unhappiness flow from our mind. If we train our mind in virtuous thoughts and act with wholesome intentions, happiness will follow. And if we act with unwholesome intentions, unhappiness will result. Buddhist practice places special importance on guarding our minds, watching our thoughts, as is clear from the opening verses of Dhampad. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him, as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. If a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him, like a shadow that never leaves him. The heart of the Buddhist practice is about cultivating an inner calm and changing our mindset. It is not so much about changing the circumstances or the world around us. Our experience and reflection make it evident that it is much more effective and easier to change ourselves than to insist on changing our circumstances. Pave the planet, or learn to wear shoes. Shantideva, an 8th century Buddhist monk, provides perhaps the most concrete advice on the art of living. Where would I possibly find enough leather with which to cover the surface of the earth? Yet, leather just on the soles of my shoes is equivalent to covering the earth with it. Self-centered misery. Buddhist psychology views desire or craving as the root cause of all human suffering. But obviously, not all desire is bad. For example, desire to be happy, grow in goodness, or be more kind is not bad. Most distress in life comes from confusing wants with needs. So, one needs to understand clearly the difference between needs and wants and try to simplify the desires. Our consumer-oriented society excels in manufacturing bogus pleasures and convincing us that we need them in order to be happy. This led Aldous Huxley to quip, "Ours is an age of systematic irrelevances. Simplifying our desires means understanding our desires so that we can monitor them rather than living in constant servitude to them." Explaining the difference between reasonable and unreasonable desires, Dalai Lama points out that excessive desire leads to greed. One interesting thing about greed is that although the underlying motive is to seek satisfaction, the irony is that even after obtaining the object of your desire, you are still not satisfied. The true antidote of greed is contentment. When surrounded with infinite variety of things on sale, it is a good mental discipline to ask every now and then, do I really need them? This applies to other material acquisitions also, including wealth. Research confirms that beyond the provision of a basic level of material comfort, more wealth does not always contribute to greater happiness. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, "Why do you want everything? Where would you keep it?" Buddha would have agreed wholeheartedly with this message and probably would have laughed at the following as well. Ever wonder what a Buddhist vacuum cleaner would look like? No attachments. "Oh Master, is it proper for a monk to use email?" asked a young monk. "Sure, as long as there are no attachments," replied the master. Everything changes. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, a modern Zen master, was once asked to sum up Buddhism in one sentence. His curt reply, "Everything changes." By understanding deeply that everything is subject to change and is dependent on everything else, we develop a new appreciation and respect for things, relationships, and our experiences. Actually, it is good that things change and that everything in the phenomenal world is impermanent. If things were not impermanent, we would be living in a fossilized world, doomed to the everlasting monotony of permanence. In such a static world, an acorn would remain an acorn, never growing into an oak tree. Seasons would not change, and flowers would not blossom. It is important to realize that impermanence is what makes change and transformation possible. Thanks to impermanence, says Thich Nhat Hanh, we can change suffering into joy. It is not impermanence that makes us suffer. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. The teaching of impermanence helps us to appreciate fully what is there without attachment or forgetfulness. Everything is interconnected with everything else. One of the most radical aspects of the Buddha's teaching is the concept of non-self. or not self, nature of all phenomena. This concept signifies that what we call I or mine is really a combination of interdependent mental and physical conditions and causes that are constantly in flux, and that there is nothing inherently permanent and unchanging in the whole phenomenal existence. Things do not have a separate, fixed self. Everything is dependent upon and reflective of everything else in this universe. Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen monk, has coined a beautiful term to describe this interrelationship of all and everything in the universe. He calls it interbeing. In his talks and seminars, Nhat Hanh usually underscores the principle of interbeing by inviting his audience to look deeply at a piece of paper. If you're a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. Without trees, we cannot make paper. If we look into this sheet of paper even more deeply, we can see sunshine in it. If the sunshine is not there, the forest cannot grow. And if we continue to look, we can see the logger who cut the trees and brought it to the mill to transform it into paper. When we look in this way, we see that without all of these things, the sheet of paper cannot exist. This sheet of paper is because everything is. As thin as this sheet of paper is, it contains everything in the universe in it. By seeing ourselves as we truly are, as a reflection of and interconnected with everything else in the universe, and by seeing things as they are, impermanent, transitory, and dependent on cause and conditions, we develop a realistic view of ourselves and things around us. Cultivating altruistic kindness. According to the Dalai Lama, if you want others to be happy, be kind. If you want to be happy, be kind. The goal of Buddhist practice is to develop wisdom within and compassion without. It holds altruistic kindness to be the most essential ingredient of genuine happiness and better mental health. Matthew Rickards states that it is essential to understand at the most fundamental level that all living creatures share our desire to avoid suffering and experience well-being. A series of studies conducted on hundreds of students found an undeniable correlation between altruism and happiness, determining that those who believe themselves to be the happiest are also the most altruistic. Buddhist practice recognizes the following four sublime states. First, extension of unlimited universal love and goodwill to all living beings without any kind of discrimination. Second, compassion for all living beings who are suffering in trouble and affliction. Third, sympathetic joy in others' success, welfare and happiness. Fourth, equanimity in all vicissitudes of life. In a verse that is also a favorite of the Dalai Lama, Shantideva captures the essence of these four states and perhaps the ultimate in human compassion. For as long as space endures, as long as living beings remain, until then, may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. A story is told of an elderly woman who used to attend every possible discourse of the Buddha she could. One day, she approached the Buddha and urged him to summarize his teachings in few lines for her recapitulation. Out of his inexhaustible compassion, the Buddha is reported to have uttered the following verse: "Abstain from all unwholesome deeds. Cultivate the capital of wholesome deeds. Purify your own mind completely. This is the teaching of the Buddhas." Avoidable and unavoidable stress. The underlying premise of this book is that there are basically two types of causes of stress: unavoidable causes and avoidable causes. The unavoidable causes of stress include events like death of a loved one, terminal illness, and extreme political and economic insecurity, outbreaks of war or any civil disturbance, and loss of employment are some examples of political and economic insecurity. All of these events, especially death and terminal illness, call forth an unusual fund of human courage, faith, and hope. Each person has to garner these inner resources in a most unique way, and not much can be said by way of broad generalizations regarding these unavoidable causes. Frankl, a Viennese psychiatrist and a survivor of 4 concentration camps during World War II, calls such events unavoidable suffering and suggests that if one cannot change a situation that causes his suffering, he can still choose his attitude. Frankl further explains, man can preserve a vestige of spiritual freedom, of independence of mind, even in such terrible conditions of psychic and physical stress. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. One only has to read Frankl's masterpiece of hope and heroism, Man's Search for Meaning, to be convinced of his tragic optimism. The second category of stressors is mainly psychological in nature. Under the avoidable type, the stress emanates primarily from mistaken values, unwarranted expectations, and faulty assumptions about life in general, and human life in particular. In fact, stress stemming from avoidable causes may be defined as a gap between what one expects and what one gets. An impartial survey of human life will show that most day-to-day stress is self-created due to what may be termed as wrong habits of mind. The most universal cause of stress is a clash between first-rate desires or expectations and second-rate efforts. This happens when this basic fact of life is overlooked. That life is largely a fair equation in which inputs equal outputs. We basically get out of life what we put into it. A tale is told of a would-be seeker who went to a Sufi master for study. After a few months of study, the student, anxious of progress, asked the teacher, "How long will it take me to get something out of my studies?" The Sufi answered, "As soon as you start putting something into your study, instead of constantly trying to get something out." Accordingly, the best antidote to the stress created by unreasonable expectations is to take inventory of our desires, assumptions, and abilities, and based on that, make necessary psychological adjustments. Happiness, said Epictetus, is a life in which one has everything he or she desires, provided that he or she desires nothing amiss. Desiring nothing amiss means not putting a grain of rice into a pot with the expectation of drawing forth a handful of food when it is cooked. In the category of avoidable stressors, there are basically two approaches. 1. Seeking fulfillment by changing our circumstances. 2. Seeking fulfillment by changing ourselves. Both are valid approaches, depending upon what is doable in given set of circumstances. The first approach concentrates upon changing circumstances or increasing one's means. Another job, a supposedly better relationship, a new car, a more expensive home, and so forth. A little experience and some reflection will dictate that the world is too vast for our undertaking and to the improvement of circumstances. There seems to be no end. Besides, we soon discover that no lasting peace of mind or security can be found in unstable anchors or in objects that are inherently impermanent in nature. The second approach, on the other hand, relies upon understanding our desires, relying more on our inner psychological resources, natural harmony, and an attitude of gratitude and acceptance. Understanding desires and expectations is perhaps the most important first step one can take toward composing one's life. As Indian sage Satya Sai Baba pointed out, man's many desires are like many metal coins he carries about in his pocket. The more he has, the more they weigh him down. Radical psychological transformation, an experiment about reality. Since changing the circumstances, for the most part, lies outside the control of an individual, it seems more prudent to change oneself until one is able to change the circumstances. Accordingly, fulfillment becomes more a matter of attitude than circumstances, more a matter of inner transformation than fixing outer conditions, more a matter of being than having, more a matter of belonging than belongings. Mind transformation, life transformation, an experiment. The following simple experiment demonstrates the importance of inner psychological transformation in altering our perception of the world. It shows how by changing our mindset, we can radically change our approach to life experiences. Take 3 small containers and place them on a table. Put cold water in the left container, regular tap water in the middle container, and hot water in the right container. Dip your left hand in the left container and your right hand in the right container. Now, simultaneously, dip both your hands in the middle container. What did you find out? You will discover that to your left hand, the water in the middle container feels hot, while it feels cold to your right hand. Yet, you know very well that the water in the middle container is neither hot nor cold. It is just the tap water at the regular room temperature. The external conditions are identical. Same person, same container, and same water temperature. Yet, it felt simultaneously hot and cold to your left and right hands respectively. By now, you probably have figured out the reason. How we will feel water temperatures of the middle container depends upon which container we put our hand first. The moral? We do not see or experience things the way they are. We see or experience them the way we are. The hot and cold sensations reside in our mind. They depend upon mind's reaction or interpretation to their contact. Similarly, the world is contacted by our mind. If we transform our mind appropriately, then our experience of life situations can be altered significantly. We have a very little control over life conditions. We have much greater control over our reactions to life conditions. While we cannot always control life conditions, we can always manage our reactions to them. While we cannot change the course of the winds, we can certainly adjust our sails. We can alter the experiences of our life without altering the external world, just by altering our mindset. So, what should one really do? Pave the planet or learn to wear shoes? The choice, as always, is ours. English poet John Milton wrote, "The mind in its own place can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." Helen Keller and Napoleon Bonaparte provide perfect illustrations of Milton's viewpoint. Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf, declared, "I find life so beautiful." Napoleon had everything that human beings usually crave: glory, power, and riches. Yet, he declared at St. Helena, "I have never known 6 happy days in my life." A tub was too large for Diogenes. The whole world was too small for Alexander the Great. Legendary encounters between Alexander the Great and Diogenes. The legends tell us that a tub was too big for Diogenes, whereas the whole world was too small for Alexander. Diogenes lived in a tub, scoring all possessions except the few necessities that could be carried in a purse. Having one time owned a drinking cup, he cast it aside as a superfluous and hence worthless encumbrance when he saw a dog drinking from a puddle. On one occasion, Diogenes declared, "Alexander eats when his officers tell him that it is time to eat. I eat when I'm hungry. I am the master of my life, and Alexander is slave to his servants." Alexander, awesome on his white horse, appeared one day before Diogenes, who was sunning himself in front of his tub, and announced that he was Alexander, the great king, to which Diogenes, the cynic, replied that he was Diogenes, the dog. The name cynic happens to be the same as the Greek word for dog-like. "Do you not fear me?" said Alexander. To this Diogenes responded, "Are you good or evil?" "Good, of course," said Alexander. And Diogenes asked, "How could anyone be so foolish to fear what is good?" The king was so struck by this that he offered the cynic anything he wanted, to which Diogenes replied, "Please, just stand out of my sunlight." Upon hearing this, Alexander the Great got off his horse and stood beside Diogenes, answerless and confused. Diogenes, acting as a good host, restarted the conversation by asking, "What are your plans, sir?" Alexander replied, "I first plan to conquer all Greece, then all Europe." "What will you do after you have conquered the whole of Europe?" asked Diogenes. Continued Alexander, "Then I will conquer the whole Middle East and move on to conquering Asia." "What will you do after that?" pressed Diogenes. "Then I will conquer the whole world and rule the whole world." "And after that?" asked Diogenes. "After conquering the whole world, I will sit in peace and enjoy the splendor of my conquest," replied the emperor. Diogenes finally asked, "Why do you not sit in peace right now? Why this bloodshed? If at the end of all you want to do is to sit and bask in your glory, why don't you do that right now?" Alexander was so impressed with the force of this argument that he mused, "If I were not Alexander, and God had asked who else I would like to be, I would have said, "Make me Diogenes, the slave." Unimpressed by this, Diogenes retorted, "If God ever asked me what I would like to be, I would say, make me anybody but Alexander." The sun was setting on the horizon. The legend tells us, as Alexander and Diogenes walked on the beach, it was Diogenes who was leading and Alexander following. We see the world the way we are. The world that we perceive is an experience in our mind, of our consciousness, coming in contact with various objects. It is a construct of our mind. It rarely occurs to us that in the strictest sense, there is no objective reality out there, independent of our consciousness. We encounter the world exactly at the level of our being. What our mind does not know, our eyes cannot see. The following example explains this fact in a graphic manner. Mindful moments. Got green lights? It has been rightly observed that we do not see things the way they are, but we see them the way we are. Thus, when we change the way we see the world, we actually change the world. The salutary effects of changing one's attitude on one's psychological well-being can be further illustrated by what may be termed as traffic light phenomena. Almost always, when we are in a hurry, we come across more red traffic lights, whereas if we are relaxed and unhurried, we get more green lights. Should we conclude that city administration adjusts the frequency of traffic lights according to our shifting moods? Perspective is everything. An exercise. Number 1. Take a pen or pencil in your hand. Number 2. Stretch up your arm straight above your head and point the pen toward the ceiling or sky. Number 3. While pointing straight up, rotate the pen in a clockwise fashion. Number 4. Looking up, keep watching its clockwise rotation. Number 5. Now bend your elbow and bring the pen down slowly, carefully maintaining its clockwise rotation. Number 6. Bring the pen to a level below your chin, so you are now looking down on it. Then, note the direction of its rotation. Is it still rotating clockwise? Looking down, you notice that the rotation is now counterclockwise, although you have not changed its direction. So why, when you look at it now, is the rotation opposite? Because you have changed your perspective. The rotation of the pen or pencil has not changed, but your perspective has. The moral of the exercise is very clear. By changing our perspective, we can change the configuration of reality. This exercise has a great message for leaders in all positions. When we view things at the leadership level, that is, looking down at the rotating pen, our vision, our goals, our policies may look a certain way to us. And to those in the rank and file, that is, employees looking at the rotating pen from below, our vision, goals, etc. may appear entirely opposite. Suzuki Roshi, one of the first authentic Zen masters to live in the West, explains the importance of changing ourselves, usually without being aware of it. We try to order things outside us, but it is impossible to organize things if you yourself are not in order. The message here seems to be that as we change our attitude toward life, life somehow changes its attitude towards us. Albert Camus said, "In the midst of winter, I finally learned that there was, in me, an invincible summer. We all have that invincible summer in us. The warmth of abiding faith and its consciousness can help us weather the winter storms. Fundamental problems of life cannot be solved. An artful understanding of the challenges of life can go a long way in meeting them squarely. More often than not, correct understanding is the most expedient thing one can bring to bear upon an issue at hand. One might as well say that the fundamental problems of life cannot be solved, but only understood. Jiddu Krishnamurti, a modern teacher, explains, "There is only the problem, there is no answer. For in understanding of the problem lies its dissolution." Accordingly, it is more often a question of what not to do than doing something that helps to resolve an issue. Chinese wisdom calls it the noble art of leaving things alone, or not legging the snake. The understanding of the problem may be seen as a higher perspective that, when reached, helps one to see the problem in its true light. Albert Einstein said, "We cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it." C.G. Jung, a psychologist who drank deeply at the unitive fountain of Eastern and Western wisdom, describes this process as outgrowing problems when they are primarily insoluble. Outgrowing essentially means raising the level of one's consciousness to enable one to experience challenges of life as storms in a valley viewed calmly from a mountain top. To use Jung's analogy, in his commentary on an ancient Chinese book of life called The Secret of the Golden Flower, Jung observes, "I have learned to see that the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They must be so because they express the necessary polarity inherent in every self-regulating system. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." This outgrowing revealed itself on further experience to be the raising of the level consciousness. Some higher or wider interest arose on the person's horizon, and through this widening of view, the insoluble problem lost its urgency. An old Sufi saying expresses Jung's wisdom concisely. When the house catches fire, the toothache flies out of the window. Improve yourself. Krishnamurti's nuggets. Krishnamurti suggests one must start very near with oneself to go very far. In the same vein, Huxley, one of the most often quoted writers of the 20th century, said, "There is only one corner of the universe you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self." One is reminded of a tale in which a socially conscious student went to a teacher with the question, "I want to make this society a better place to live. What should I do?" The teacher answered, "Just improve yourself." Your own self-realization, said Sri Ramana Maharishi, is the greatest service you can render the world. Our own transformation is the greatest gift we can offer to the universe. Self-knowledge does not really result in seeing different things. It just helps to see things differently. Once, Zen teacher Maureen Stewart went to New York to see Soen Roshi, a famous Zen master. "How did you get here?" asked the Roshi. "I drove my car," replied Stewart. "And how are you driving your life?" he asked. That is the question. Concluding remarks. I do not want to give the impression that I have figured it all out. I also have my share of difficulties. If this were not true, my attempt at writing this book would be but an empty intellectual exercise. What Gurdjieff calls pouring from the empty into the void. In this regard, I feel a deep kinship of spirit with the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote to a young poet seeking his advice. Do not believe that he who seeks to comfort you lives untroubled among the simple and quiet words that sometimes do you good. His life has much difficulty and sadness. Were it otherwise, he would never have been able to find those words. If the ideas presented in this book help even a single person to sort out his or her options more clearly, my efforts will be amply rewarded. In the final reckoning, everyone has to write his or her own life's recipe book for finding fulfillment. After all, nobody has more students than oneself. Nobody has more teachers than oneself. Rumi says it well. You are the only disciple you have. All others eventually leave.